Hey, it's Nathan. I want to tell you about a man who fixed windshields for a living, and how that turned out to be the most dangerous thing his wife's family never bothered to understand about him. Kellen Hartley spent his days calibrating the little camera that sits behind your rearview mirror, the one that keeps your car in its lane, that brakes for the kid you didn't see. His whole trade came down to one idea: aim everything at a fixed point, and the truth lines up. People trusted him with the glass they looked at the world through. What they forgot is that a man who installs cameras for a living tends to know exactly what a camera can see. This one's about a phone call from a cop, a lunch that was really a trap, and a thing he saw in his own mirror that he says he'll never unsee. It's about how the quiet, patient people are the ones you should never corner, and it's about the difference between a man who panics and a man who calibrates. Stay to the end, because the last thing he does isn't loud at all, and that's exactly why it works. Let me take you to Redfield, Illinois, on an ordinary Saturday that somebody had spent 3 months planning. Kellen Hartley was 36 the spring everything came apart, and he had the kind of steadiness that made people underestimate him his whole life. He ran Hartley Auto Glass and Calibration off Route 9 in Redfield, a clean two-bay shop his father Abner had opened before Kellen could walk. Abner had died 4 years earlier, and he'd left 2 things behind: the shop and a trust for his grandchildren, funded by the sale of the old second location out on the county line. It wasn't a fortune. It was $140,000 that could only be touched for the education and care of Bodie and Georgia Hartley, with Kellen as the guardian who signed off on every dollar. Abner had been very careful about that. Money finds the greedy, he used to say, so you tie it to the innocent and you put an honest man in front of it. Bodie was 6 that year, and Georgia was 4. Kellen's wife, Elise, was a Sorley, and the Sorleys were a name in Redfield the way a bruise is a color. They ran Sorley Towing and Recovery, the yard that pulled your car off the shoulder and charged you like they'd delivered it by helicopter. They ran Sorley Title and Escrow, which is a boring little office that quietly touches every piece of property that changes hands in a small town. Estelle Sorley, Elise's mother, sat at the center of all of it like a spider that had learned to smile. And Colt Sorley, Elise's brother, drove the biggest tow truck and had the shortest temper. Kellen had married Elise because she'd been funny and warm once, in the years before the Sorley in her won out over the person. He'd told himself the coldness was stress. He'd told himself a lot of things. What he hadn't let himself notice, because noticing would cost him his family, was how often Elise's phone lit face down at midnight, and how she'd started saying the word conservator the way other people say a name. The man on the other end of that phone was Grayson Wexford. Grayson ran a business in the next county called Keystone Co-Parenting Solutions, and if you read the brochure, it was all soft light and gentle fonts about helping families transition with dignity. What it actually did was uglier and much smarter than anything the Sorleys could have dreamed up on their own. Grayson found bitter divorces where a child stood to inherit money, and he taught the greedy parent how to build a case that the other parent was unstable, dangerous, unfit. He coached the coaching. He knew which words trigger an emergency custody order and which concerns a judge can't ignore. And once the courts handed the child to his client, Grayson would get himself appointed conservator of the child's money for continuity of care, and then he would bleed the trust dry in fees over the years it took anyone to notice. He had done it to 4 families that Kellen didn't yet know about. He was about to try it on a 5th. The affair between Elise and Grayson had started as business. Estelle had found Keystone the way she found everything, through the title office, where a colleague mentioned a man who could make a custody problem disappear. Elise had gone to a consultation and come home quiet. Within a month, it wasn't business anymore, and within 2 months, Elise, Estelle, and Grayson had a plan that would separate Kellen from his children and, more importantly, from the little trust standing between the Sorleys and $140,000 they had already spent in their heads. The plan needed one thing above all. It needed Kellen to look dangerous on paper. So for 3 months, they built it. Estelle installed a set of small home cameras in her house for security, aimed at the front room and the driveway. Elise started keeping a journal her lawyer would later call contemporaneous notes, full of afternoons that never happened. Kellen shouting, Kellen grabbing her wrist, Kellen frightening the kids. Grayson introduced them to a custody evaluator named Dr. Halsey Wren, who for the right consideration would write that a father was a risk. And they arranged, very carefully, the one afternoon where all of it would come together. a family lunch at Estelle's house, where Kellen would drop off the kids, be provoked into an ugly scene in front of the cameras, and then, this was the clever part, be handed the children right back and encouraged to take them. One day after a temporary custody order had been quietly filed, but not yet served. The moment he drove off with Bodie and Georgia in the car, he would be a father violating a court order. He'd be an abduction. Estelle would call it in with a script she'd practically memorized. And by Monday, Kellen Hartley would be a man fighting from a jail cell for the right to see his own children, with a stranger named Grayson signing the checks from their college fund. It was a good plan. It had worked before. They just didn't account for the fact that Kellen's older brother wore a badge. Camden Hartley, Cam to everyone who'd known him longer than a day, was a detective with the county sheriff's office, and he had spent his career learning to read the shape of a thing before it fully formed. He and Kellen weren't the kind of brothers who talked every day, but they were the kind who would put a body between each other and a bullet without discussing it first, and both of them knew it. Cam had felt the Sorleys circling his brother for months, the way you feel weather. He didn't have proof of anything, and Kellen didn't want to hear it. No man wants to be told his marriage is a countdown. So Cam did the only thing a careful cop can do. He waited, and he kept his ear to the county's plumbing. 2 days before that Saturday lunch, a temporary custody order crossed a desk Cam happened to walk past, filed on behalf of Elise Hartley, supported by an evaluation from a Dr. Wren, whose name Cam had seen once before on a case that had smelled wrong. Cam pulled the thread quietly. He found the not yet served order. He found a request that patrol be available in the area of the Sorley residence Saturday afternoon for a possible domestic. And he found, in the dispatch pre-notes, a suggested narrative already written down before anything had happened. Father with history of instability, likely to remove children in violation of order. You don't write the story before the event unless you're planning the event. Cam sat in his car in the sheriff's lot for a long minute, feeling the floor tilt under a life he cared about. Then he did the math on how a smart, calm man survives a trap built entirely out of appearances. And he picked up his phone. Kellen was wiping down a freshly calibrated windshield when it buzzed. He almost didn't answer. Saturdays were his catch-up day at the shop before he picked the kids up from Elise's mother's. But it was Cam, and Cam never called on a Saturday. "Where are you?" Cam said, and something in his voice made Kellen set the cloth down. "Shop. About to head to Estelle's to get the kids. Elise dropped them there this morning for some lunch thing." He frowned. "Why? Are the kids at the Sorley house right now?" "Yeah, I'm picking them up at 1. There was a breath on the line that Kellen would remember for the rest of his life. The sound of his brother choosing his words while a clock ran. "Kellen, listen to me and don't argue. Go get them. Right now. Not at 1. Put them in the car and drive." "Cam, what? Don't ask. Just go." The steadiness in Cam's voice cracked, just slightly, and that hairline crack scared Kellen more than shouting ever could have. His brother did not scare. "Go get your kids and get them out of that house. But Kellen, when you have them, you do not speed, you do not run a light, you do not touch anybody, you do not raise your voice. You drive the speed limit straight to me at the station. Do you understand? Straight to the station. I'll explain when you're moving." Kellen was already pulling off his gloves. "I understand." He locked the shop with the fast, thoughtless competence of a man whose hands knew their jobs, and he got in his own car, the family SUV Elise usually drove, which he'd taken this week because hers was in for brakes. As he started the engine, the little green indicator on the mirror mount blinked once. The cabin camera. He'd installed it himself 2 years ago, back when he'd been thinking about letting a teenager babysit drive the kids, and he'd wired it into the car's power so it ran whenever the engine did, recording the cabin and the road, uploading to his shop's cloud whenever it found Wi-Fi. Elise had complained about it once, and he'd told her he'd turn it off. He'd meant to. He'd forgotten. Everyone had forgotten. It had been recording for 2 years. He drove to Estelle's with his heart going and his hands perfectly steady, because that was the split in Kellen Hartley that nobody in the Sorley family had ever properly measured. He could be terrified and precise at the same time. Estelle's house sat back from the road behind a lawn she paid a boy to keep too green. When Kellen pulled in, the front door opened before he'd cut the engine, which was the first wrong thing. Estelle never rushed for anyone. She came out smiling with her arms open, saying something warm about how early he was. Wasn't that nice? Behind her, in the front room, Kellen could see Elise, which was the second wrong thing. because Elise had said she wouldn't be there. And parked 3 houses down, under a maple, was a silver car Kellen didn't recognize, with a man sitting in it who was very deliberately looking at his phone and not at the house. Bodie came barreling out first. "Dad," and Georgia toddled after him with a juice box, and every instinct in Kellen's body reorganized itself around the two of them. He crouched, caught them both, and stood with Georgia on his hip and Bodie's hand in his. "We're gonna go for a drive, buddies," he said. "Easy as anything. Say bye to Grandma." Estelle's smile changed. It didn't fall. She was far too practiced for that. But it set, like something curing in the sun. "Oh, they haven't had lunch yet. Stay. Elise is here. We can all—" Another time. He was already walking to the car, unhurried, buckling Georgia into her seat, checking Bodie's belt with a tug his hands had done 10,000 times. His pulse was a drum. His movements were a metronome. Behind him, he heard Elise's voice come out onto the porch, sharp now, the warmth all gone. Kellen, what are you doing? You can't just take them." That word, take, landed in his gut like a stone, because it was the wrong word for a father putting his own kids in his own car, and some deep part of him understood in that instant that the word had been chosen in advance. He didn't answer. He got in. He started the engine. The green light on the mirror blinked, and he looked up into the rearview mirror. What he saw in that small rectangle of glass was a thing he would try to describe for the rest of his life and never quite manage. Estelle Sorley was standing on her front steps with her phone held up in both hands, filming him, her face arranged into an expression of fear she did not feel. Elise stood beside her, one hand over her mouth, performing the same fear for the same lens. The man from the silver car 3 houses down was out now, walking up the sidewalk, and it was Grayson Wexford, though Kellen didn't yet have the name, just the sick certainty of a stranger who belonged to this scene like he'd blocked it. And rolling slowly up the street from the corner, engine growling, came the enormous flat black grille of Colt Sorley's tow truck, angling to put itself across the mouth of the driveway. They were all there, every one of them, filming, waiting, a wall of them, in his mirror, behind his children's heads. The lunch had never been a lunch. The whole afternoon was a set, and he had almost walked onto it right on his mark. If Cam had called at 1 o'clock instead of noon, Kellen would have arrived to a house full of provocation and cameras, and he'd have given them the 90 ugly seconds they needed. Instead, he'd arrived an hour early, before the actors were in position, before the scene was lit, and he'd picked up his children and gotten in his car while they were still setting up. And in the mirror, mixed in with all of it, the little green light blinked again. Kellen Hartley looked at that light, and at the people arranging themselves into a lie behind him, and a strange calm came down over him like a clean sheet of glass. Because he understood 2 things at once. He understood that they had built a story out of appearances, and that appearances were the exact thing he could not fight with words. And he understood that the camera his wife had forgotten, the one running on his own dashboard, had just filmed the entire truth. Estelle's rehearsed terror, the tow truck, the stranger, the timing, and had been quietly filming the 2 years of this family that came before it. "You calibrate to a fixed point," his father used to say. "Everything else lines up from there." Kellen put the car in reverse. Colt's tow truck had not quite closed the driveway yet. He backed out smoothly, gave Colt a small friendly wave through the windshield like a man with nothing in the world to hide, and pulled away at exactly 25 miles an hour. "Where are we going, Dad?" Bodie asked from the back. "To see Uncle Cam," Kellen said, "and then we're going to get some lunch. A real one." Behind him, in the mirror, Estelle lowered her phone and turned to Elise. And even at that distance, Kellen could read the shape of the word her mouth made. It was not a nice word. It was the word of a plan that had been an hour too slow. Cam met him in the station lot, and the first thing he did was crouch down to the car window and make his face into something warm for the kids. "Hey, wild animals," he said, and Georgia shrieked with delight, and Bodie started telling him about a bug he'd seen. Cam let them talk for exactly as long as it took him to look his brother in the eye over their heads and confirm that Kellen was, against all odds, completely calm. Inside, with a deputy quietly walking the kids to a break room, stocked with the crayons the department kept for exactly this kind of afternoon, Cam laid it out. The unserved order, the pre-written dispatch narrative, Dr. Wren, the request to have patrol standing by. They were going to let you take the kids, Cam said, and then call it in as a kidnapping. By the time it got sorted out, You'd have been the dangerous father who violated an order and had to be arrested in front of his children. Emergency full custody to Elise. And I'm guessing, he added, watching Kellen's face, there's money somewhere they want. Dad's trust, Kellen said. For the kids. 140 grand I control. He said it slowly, hearing how it sounded out loud for the first time. That's what this is. Cam sat back. Okay, so here's the bad news. On paper, right now, you did exactly what they wanted. You removed the kids. The order exists. If we do this wrong, you're the villain and I'm the brother who tipped you off. He rubbed his face. We can't beat appearances by yelling that it's not fair. We have to beat it with something appearances can't argue with. And Kellen, for the first time all day, smiled. A small, tired, dangerous smile. Cam, he said, how much do you know about how a modern car sees the world? He told his brother about the cabin camera, about the 2 years of footage sitting on the shop's cloud server, time-stamped, uploaded, untouchable, about the fact that his SUV, the one Elise usually drove, the one that had been at every Sorley gathering, every quiet errand, every late-night pickup, had a front camera, a cabin camera, and a telematics module that logged where the car went and when, all of it feeding a system Kellen maintained for a living and knew how to pull. And he told him that today, in that driveway, that same system had recorded Estelle Sorley rehearsing her fear, the tow truck closing the trap, and a stranger walking up the sidewalk right on cue. They filmed me to build a lie, Kellen said. They didn't think about the fact that I've been filming the truth the whole time. I install these for a living. I forgot it was even on. So did they. Cam was quiet for a moment. Then he said the sentence that turned a frightened father into a patient hunter. Don't touch it yet. Don't post it. Don't send it. Don't threaten anybody with it. If they know it exists, they'll say you doctored it. Let them keep building. Let them file. Let them lie on the record. He leaned forward. And then we hand the whole thing, the footage, the logs, the timeline, to somebody who eats this kind of fraud for breakfast. Let them walk all the way out onto the ice before we tell them how thin it is. That somebody turned out to be a woman named Reina Salcedo, a state investigator whose unit handled financial crimes against children and protected persons. Cam knew her from a case 2 years back, when he laid out the shape of what the Sorleys and Grayson Wexford were doing. A custody order manufactured to seize a child's trust. Salcedo's face did the thing investigators' faces do when a small local ugliness turns out to be the tip of something they've been hunting for a while. Wexford, she said. Keystone. I've had that name in a drawer for a year, and never enough to open it. She looked at Kellen. You're telling me you have him on camera, walking up to a staged scene? I have him on camera, Kellen said, and I have 2 years of my own family, which I'm guessing lines up with a lot of dates in your drawer. Over the next 3 weeks, the trap the Sorleys built became the trap that held them, and the beauty of it was that Kellen barely had to touch it. He let them do the work. They filed. Of course they filed. Monday morning, an emergency motion landed accusing Kellen of removing the children in violation of the temporary order, endangering them, a pattern of instability documented in Elise's contemporaneous notes and Dr. Wren's evaluation. Estelle submitted her video from the driveway, carefully edited to begin the instant Kellen was already walking to the car, so that a father calmly buckling his kids looked, without context, like a snatch. Grayson Wexford, listed now as the family's co-parenting consultant and proposed conservator, sat in the gallery in a good suit and radiated concern. And Kellen's attorney, a sharp, unhurried woman named Isla Ben, who Salcedo had quietly recommended, let almost all of it stand. She objected to nothing worth objecting to. She let Elise read her notes. She let Estelle narrate her video. She let Dr. Wren describe a man he'd interviewed for 40 minutes as a danger to his children. She let Grayson Wexford explain, in his soft brochure voice, how he only wanted continuity and stability for Bodie and Georgia, and how a conservatorship over their modest trust would ensure their needs were met regardless of the custody outcome. She let them build the entire cathedral of the lie, brick by brick, on the record, under oath. Then she asked the court's permission to introduce a video. What played on the screen was not edited. It started with the engine turning over and the little green light blinking. It showed Kellen crouching to catch his kids. It showed him buckling Georgia's seat with the patience of a man who'd done it 1,000 times. And then it showed the rearview mirror. Estelle on the steps with her phone up, arranging her face. Elise beside her doing the same. Grayson Wexford, whom Dr. Wren had just called a neutral consultant, walking up the sidewalk like a director checking his set, and Colt's tow truck swinging across the driveway to seal a man and 2 children inside a scene. The timestamp in the corner matched, to the second, the timestamp on Estelle's own carefully clipped video. Her clip started exactly 1 second after the moment Kellen's footage proved the trap was already closing. Isla Ben did not raise her voice once. The petitioner's exhibit, she said, begins 1 second after this. I'd ask the court to consider what happened in the second before. And then she introduced the rest of it. 2 years of a family, timestamped and telematics logged. The dates Elise's car had spent parked overnight at an address that turned out to be Grayson Wexford's, cross-referenced against the contemporaneous notes that put Kellen home, shouting on the very same nights. Late-night calls, the GPS placed her taking in a parking lot behind the title office, and handed to the court through Reina Salcedo rather than through Kellen, because a patient man knows the difference between evidence and revenge, the thing that turned a custody hearing into a criminal case. 8 months of session recordings from inside Keystone Co-Parenting, kept by a 20-year-old intake coordinator named Kit Farrow, who had grown sicker and sicker of what she was transcribing. Kit had recorded Grayson coaching Elise on which words to use. She'd recorded him explaining the conservator fee structure to Estelle. The beauty is, once I'm appointed, the fees come out of the child's account, so it costs the family nothing. She'd recorded the sentence that ended him, spoken in his soft brochure voice, about a 6-year-old boy and a 4-year-old girl he had never met. The trust is small, but there are 2 of them, and these things run for years. It adds up. The courtroom was very quiet after that. Dr. Halsey Wren's evaluation was thrown out, and Dr. Halsey Wren's license did not survive the year. Grayson Wexford was arrested at the courthouse, which is a rare and satisfying thing to watch, and when Salcedo's people opened the drawer she'd been keeping his name in, they found 4 other families and enough drained trusts to keep him in a courtroom for a very long time. The Sorley title and escrow office turned out to be where a lot of that money had quietly rested on its way to somewhere else, which is how Estelle Sorley learned that helping run a fraud is not so different, in the eyes of the state, from inventing one. Colt was charged for his part in the driveway. A tow truck is a hard thing to explain when it's blocking a car full of children and there's no car to tow. Elise did not go to prison. Kellen, to the surprise of people who wanted a bloodier ending, didn't push for it. He had the kids, full custody, the trust intact, and now watched over by a court that had learned exactly what it had almost allowed. He had his father's fixed point. He found he didn't need her to suffer. He needed her gone, and she was. The last time he saw her was in a hallway outside a courtroom, and she looked at him with something between fury and disbelief and asked the only question she had left. How did you even know? Kellen thought about his brother's voice cracking on the phone. He thought about a green light he'd forgotten to turn off. He thought about his father, and fixed points, and the patient trade of aiming a camera at the truth and waiting for the world to line up. I fix mirrors for a living, Elise, he said. You should have remembered that they work both ways. Then he went to pick up his kids and drove home at exactly the speed limit, with nothing in the world left to hide. So that's the story of Kellen Hartley, and I've been thinking about it ever since I first heard it, because it breaks a rule we all quietly believe. We think the person who wins is the one who reacts fastest, hits hardest, yells loudest. Kellen won by doing almost nothing. He got a phone call that would have sent most of us into a panic, grab the kids, run, and instead he did the terrifying, disciplined thing. He moved fast and stayed slow. He drove 25 miles an hour away from a trap while his heart was coming out of his chest. Here's what I keep coming back to. The Sorleys built their whole plan out of appearances, because appearances are cheap and courts are busy, and a scared-sounding video is very convincing. What they never accounted for was a man whose entire trade was aiming a lens at a fixed point and trusting it to tell the truth later. They filmed a lie. He'd been filming the truth for 2 years and forgot it was even running. That's not luck. That's a life. The way you live when nobody's watching is the evidence that saves you when everybody is. And notice he didn't need her to burn. Once his kids were safe and the trust his father built for them was protected, the appetite for revenge just left him. The bad people fell because of what they'd actually done. On the record, in their own words. He didn't have to become them to beat them. If you take one thing from this, Take his father's line, calibrate to a fixed point, and everything else lines up. Be honest when it's boring, stay calm when it's loud, and remember that mirrors work both ways. I'm Nathan. Thanks for staying to the end. Take care of the quiet ones. They see everything.